Hello, I'm Aline Saeed. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, this year's Davos was dominated by geopolitical turmoil and trade fracture. Is it a symbol of global cooperation amid chaos or just a talking shop? With the world order at stake, does the World Economic Forum really matter? A push to rebuild Gaza is now taking shape. Members of the Board of Peace that will oversee governance and reconstruction have been named. But what are the challenges and who will fund it? Iran's economic crisis is deepening. The value of the rial has plunged and public anger is simmering. This is despite the government's efforts to ease the pain. But can the economy be fixed with sanctions in place? For more than 55 years, the World Economic Forum in Davos stood as a symbol of global cooperation. Today, that's under pressure. The annual pilgrimage of the world's political and corporate elite, the Swiss mountains, has come at a critical point. Geopolitical tensions are at a fever pitch. The US, long a champion of multi-lateral cooperation and open trade, is now led by a president openly sceptical of both. Donald Trump is using tariffs for economic and political leverage and threatening to dismantle the rule-based global order. Well, critics say the summit is long on talk and short on action, especially on issues like inequality, technology and climate change. Supporters say keeping rivals talking may help contain some of the world's biggest problems. Paul Ging has this report.
At Davos in 2026, the theme is a spirit of dialogue. But one man is doing most of the talking. The biggest ever US team means a changed agenda. Climate change is down.
I think robots are actually going to be a very big business.
AI growth and the influence of the private sector are up.
In today's world, the private sector is also critical to finding solutions. Many countries are more indebted than at any other time since 1945, while the private sector has a lot of resources. So public-private partnership and to work together is critically important. I think this has been one of the things that President Trump has underlined being important by coming to Davos.
So business leaders will benefit from American priorities. But for political leaders, Trump's shake-up of the world order is front and center.
Geopolitics is changing. We are, some people think we're in a transition, some people think we've already entered a new era, but I think it's undeniable that you are seeing a more competitive, more contested landscape.
That contest is obvious. European leaders are struggling with Trump's America First agenda. Lately, that's been his ambition to own Greenland and also tariff threats. But the world's second biggest economy sees a Trump-powered shake-up as an opportunity.
A select few countries should not have privileges based on self-interest, and the world cannot revert to the law of the jungle, where the strong prey on the weak. All countries have the right to protect their legitimate interests.
So for governments, there's a big picture, uncertainty and maybe opportunities. For billionaires, as an Oxfam survey shows, riches continue to grow. But for the half of the world's population in poverty, the wealth gap is not as prominent on the Davos agenda. Paul Ging, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, we're joined by Manfred Elzig, a Professor of International Relations and a Managing Director of the World Trade Institute at the University of Bern. He joins us from Bern. Many thanks for joining the programme. So, Manfred, what's your take on this? Does Davos still matter, or is this just a high-profile talking shop?
So the World Economic Forum has been a talking shop, if you want, for many years. It has changed a lot. You see now in recent times that geopolitics is probably big on the agenda, power politics, the disruption, I would say, that's happening, the uncertainty. And most of all, I think what we see at the moment is sort of the transatlantic partnership taking a very, very big hit.
If it does still have any relevance at all, what would you say that relevance is?
Well, I think the major relevance for business people is meeting and greeting and making business deals. So in the media, we are, of course, looking at the big political picture. But in the background, there are thousands of meetings, and it's one of the largest gatherings of the World Economic Forum ever. So I think we need to see who is there, what kind of objectives do they have. There's a lot happening behind closed doors. This is not in the media. So I think there's different Davos meetings going on at the same time at the moment.
It's interesting you mentioned business leaders, but when you look at this year's agenda, it's dominated by things like Venezuela, Greenland, tariffs. All this is geopolitical. Is power politics now more important?
Yes, and one has to say, of course, that the United States had certainly had a big impact on the overall agenda. So the topics that we use to talk about, like climate, like diversity, like human rights, they're gone at the moment. So it's all on the economic side. It's really on AI. It's about growth. It's about financial services. That is what we're observing right now.
What do you think?
And then how do businesses
do you think they've been gone for good, or is this a temporary disruption?
No, I think we are seeing here actually something monumental. We're seeing that the transatlantic alliance, working over 70 years together, has received this week a big hit. So through the Greenland story, the European Union has realized that on the US side, the transatlantic partner is more or less gone. So this is I think politically, we'll see it historically, a very important meeting. And we've seen over the past 2 days also very different visions of the world. We've seen the US administration vision, and we've seen the vision by European leaders and the Canadian leaders. So we've seen a big disruption this week in terms of the power politics.
If you think the era of globalization is shifting, even if that's not by a huge amount, and it's not to the extent that some leaders have described it, what is it shifting to?
So I think we're seeing a system in which, from the perspective of companies, they've started to look at their risks in much more detail. So they've looked at their supply chains. And that's what we're seeing happening all the time. So companies have started to live with political, geopolitical risks. And so I think there's a lot of work going on there. The question, I think, for international cooperation is really, is there a group of countries which has benefited from an open system in the past 70 years, and are they ready to invest resources and time into upholding a system that has worked quite well? Well, with flaws, but it has worked quite well for these countries. So this is a bit the question of, we have a liberal hegemon who is kind of exiting the system. And so what does this mean for all the rest of the countries that would like to continue cooperation? And I don't think there's an alternative to cooperation. You know, if everyone talks about power politics and geopolitics, that is not the solution going forward. I think for the humanity, we need to have cooperation. We need to believe in international organizations, international law. Otherwise, we have what's been called the rule of the jungle.
What about countries like China? Are they benefiting from these shifting rules?
Yes, I think China at the moment is more silent. They are observing these transatlantic difficulties that we're seeing at the moment. They're continuing to grow. They're continuing to have influence in the region and way beyond. And they have made also quite clear statements at this World Economic Forum that they believe in multilateralism. They believe in international law. So at the moment, I think China doesn't have to do a lot. It's gaining in power and in influence. And so in that sense, you know, it doesn't have to be as active as the Trump administration in trying to set the agenda.
Manfred, fascinating to get your perspective on this. Manfred Elsig, Professor of International Relations and Managing Director of the World Trade Institute at the University of Bern. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Plans around governance and reconstruction in Gaza are moving forward. Central to those efforts is the Board of Peace, part of the second phase of the US-backed ceasefire deal. But the scale of the task to rebuild the Strip is immense. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out after more than 2 years of Israel's war on Gaza. Basic services, including electricity, clean water and healthcare, remain severely disrupted. And millions of tons of debris need to be cleared. The UN estimates rebuilding costs at around $70 billion. But who foots the bill? Hind Kadari reports from Gaza City.
Crushed concrete, bent steel, and what were once homes. Gaza's mountains of debris stretch endlessly in every direction.
This is not a single concentrated area of devastation. It is the reality across most of the Gaza Strip.
Satellite data show that close to 80% of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed by more than 2 years of Israeli bombardment. Estimates say there is 61 million tons of rubble in the Strip, enough to bury New York's Central Park under 12 meters of debris, roughly equal to the mass of 13 Great Pyramids.
As you see, wherever you go, mountains of rubble. We need 6 or 7 years only to remove it, of course, if they have the ability to remove it. Buildings, houses are all reduced to rubble. This is all across Gaza, wherever you go.
Beyond blocking roads and neighborhoods, the rubble poses serious risks. Humanitarian organizations warn it may conceal unexploded munitions and toxic substances. Unstable structures are at risk of sudden collapse. Removing debris is essential before any large-scale recovery can begin, but that will take years. Up to 7 years, according to engineers from the UN.
In Gaza, 61 million tons of debris is built up in public spaces. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. I'm here in Deir el-Balah in Gaza at one of UNDP's debris crushing sites. We have 5 of these sites across the Gaza Strip.
Reconstruction costs in Gaza are estimated at around $70 billion. Hundreds of millions are more needed just to remove the rubble.
Clearing the rubble in Gaza will take years. For Palestinians, it carries hope for rebuilding, but the grief for the memories buried beneath the rubble. Hind al-Khudari, Al Jazeera for Counting the Cost, Gaza, Palestine.
Well, we're joined now by Raja Khalidi. He's in Ramallah. He's an economist with decades of experience in developmental policies in Palestine. And as I said, he is in Ramallah for us. Many thanks for joining the program. It's interesting when you look at that package and you see the level of destruction. And despite that, we've heard from Ali Shah. This is the man who's been tasked to lead Gaza's reconstruction and recovery. He is estimating that this can all be done in 7 years. Do you think that's a realistic estimate?
Look, I'm glad you opened to that because, in fact, what we heard today, between what we heard from Ali Shah and what we heard from Jared Kushner, really sums it up. I mean, Jared Kushner said one thing which I could find myself agreeing with, namely that Arab cities have been built in a matter of years, and we saw Qatar, what an amazing, transformation in 10 years it underwent, and so on and so forth. So I think the 7 years, 10 years, 5 years is not the point. The 7-year estimate is certainly a reasonable one, but it's assuming a pace of removal and not 5 UNDP but 50 such sites and so on and so forth. So it's a matter of the conditions under which this is allowed to proceed, not to mention the financing. But I think
let's talk a little bit about those conditions. What sort of challenges do you think he is going to face? What are the biggest ones?
Well, on the ground, it's very clear. He already, the committee already sketched out in their first statements and pronouncements that the biggest issue tomorrow and for the immediate future and until it's resolved is bringing in 200,000 caravans at least. That's only one of a range of what we call relief, if not yet even rehabilitation measures that have yet to be assured. not to mention all of the food and medical and other relief. So the thing that's important here is that it's clear that this new committee is very aware of what its mandate is and what its priorities are, namely tents, medicines, food, access, clearing rubble, which is a task that's going to take them into their first months, if not first year. So, on the one hand, you have that, which is people whose feet are on the ground and who are trying to respond to what this Council Board of Peace was made for. And then you have the Jared Kushners, with their illusions about beachfront property and disaster. He even used the word, success, a catastrophic success, which he is meaning, we wanted to have a great success in doing this, but it's making success out of a catastrophe. So these are two very widely divergent visions for planning and reconstruction, which I think are going to be as problematic as getting the tents, as getting the caravans in and getting the Israelis to do the minimum of their obligations in this situation. So that's the first. So the conditions are access.
Mr. Khalidi. We still have Hamas and, of course, Israel. You mentioned them both still wielding significant influence inside Gaza. Do you see that holding up the process?
Well, Israel for sure, because we know Israel's position already have made it problematic for this committee to even exist, and we don't know what sort of treatment they're going to get as things go, and what sort of facilitation they're going to get via the Americans as we move forward. But I don't think Hamas is the issue. I mean, nobody has mentioned it recently. There's an assumption which we all have to, we can build into our planning that Hamas is going to go along with enough demilitarization to satisfy. To allow this international force to come in, which will allow an extension of the area that the National Committee will have to worry about. So I think, rather than diverting attention to these grand schemes of the new Gaza and Riviera, which is going to be a major pressure coming from the executive board of this Board of Peace, Ali Shah and his colleagues are going to have to worry about the nitty gritty, the rubble and the tents, and that's what we should be, I think, thinking about what's going to cost and what is it going to need before we start talking about how you're going to redesign Gaza spatially.
I mean, the cost, of course, is significant. It's thought to that the process is going to take at least $70 billion. Where do you think that money is going to come from?
Well, again, this number of 70 billion is probably the best, most reliable one because it's based on the World Bank and United Nations estimates and verified by the Palestinian Authority's own planning procedures. On the other hand, you had an earlier estimate of the Kushner vision of something like 115 billion, of which part of which is equity investment, etc. And then you have lower estimates. It depends on what sort of reconstruction you're going to do and over what sort of a period. But the reconstruction is something that we're going to have major, in the tens of billions of funds, but you're not going to be able to effectively spend more than 5-6 billion a year if you're lucky, in terms of actually, once we're there. But we're not there yet, is my point. And I think that too much of the discussion keeps going to this, day after the day after. We're still not in the first part of the day after, which is relief, recovery, rehabilitation, decent shelter, food security, income, and things like that.
Raja Khalidi, really good to get your perspective. Economist Raja Khalidi there.
Thank you very much.
Soaring inflation, collapsing purchasing power, and a currency crash. Iran's most severe economic crisis in decades sparked days of protests. The demonstrations have subsided for now, but the underlying problems remain. And uncertainty is being compounded by renewed Western pressure, including new US tariffs on countries trading with Iran. All of it is adding to political and economic volatility in a nation that is squeezed by sanctions. Laura Khan has more.
If you want to know what people are protesting about in Iran, this is what you need to look at. When the revolution happened in 1979, $1 cost about 70 rials. Now you need 1.3 million rials to buy a single dollar. Currencies rise and fall, but over the same period, one British pound went from buying $2.1 to 1.3. Iranians' purchasing power has fallen by more than 90%. The real value, what people can buy with what they earn, is less than a tenth of what it was a few years ago. Food prices are up more than 70% compared with last year. Jobs are also scarce. 1 in 5 young Iranians is out of work. So protesters might feel justified, but there's a deeper reason: sanctions. Iran's government has little money or room to manoeuvre. The amount and type of sanctions imposed on the regime since 1979 has changed, but an easing of sanctions was ended by Donald Trump in 2018, and that took Iran's economy backwards. But sanctions have a secondary effect, and it's not all about external pressure. Sanctions force things like oil exports into the grey economy, where corruption is more easily hidden. Critics say state-linked groups and government departments have taken advantage of this. Protesters complain they're seeing a few Iranians living a high life while they struggle to make ends meet.
A series of price hikes have occurred in the past few days. The high dollar exchange rate and rising oil prices, these have all fueled the fire. The government should have acted more wisely on this, rather than suddenly raising prices and prompting people to protest in this way.
The government should at least listen to the people and understand what they are saying and what's happening in society with these high costs and this economic situation. I'm a young person myself who cannot do anything about this economic situation in my life. At the very least, we should have freedom of speech so we can express our protests somewhere and be heard.
With sanctions limiting income, rising costs, accusations of elite corruption and protests on the street, it's hard to see where Iran's economy goes next. Laura Khan, Al Jazeera, counting the costs.
OK, let's speak to Nader Habibi, Professor in Middle East Economics at Brandeis University. He joins me from Boston. Really good to have you on the programme. Economically, how unstable would you say Iran is right now?
Well, it is very fragile and unstable. And the reason for that is that even before the protests, the economy was under significant amount of stress. As your reporter mentioned, the exchange rate, which is very important for the Iranian economy, became very volatile in the weeks leading to the protests. And the impact was so severe that even the merchants in the bazaar, who are not generally the type to initiate any kind of street protests, had to close their shops and come into the streets. And their initial protest launched the widespread protest that we witnessed over the past 4 weeks, which of course have...
What was the reason for that sharp devaluation of the rial?
Yes, the pressure of the economic sanctions was one of the, I think, most important factors because ever since President Trump came to power in January 20th of 2025, he has intensified the pressure on Iranian economy. And as a result of that, the supply of currency for the economy, which comes from export of oil and some petrochemical products, was disrupted in many ways. So we saw a rapid devaluation of the Iranian rial in the weeks ahead of the protests.
If I'm right, what they were actually seeing was prices even changing overnight from evening to morning. How damaging is that kind of volatility for ordinary Iranians?
Very damaging. Well, for the citizens, for people, ordinary people, it was the increase in prices, which was happening very rapidly. But for the merchants, for the bazaris, it was both the increase and volatility because they could not really decide on what to purchase, what to sell, and at what price to sell. So for them, it was volatility that was very important. For consumers, it was the steady decline in their purchasing power.
And we heard in that package that Iran's problems go beyond the Western sanctions. They also deal with problems within the government, of corruption and so on. But in your opinion, what is the main reason for the problems in the economy? Is it the sanctions?
Yes, it is the sanctions, but sanctions themselves have contributed to the economic mismanagement and the perception of the unfair distribution of economic resources in society. Because as a result of economic and military pressure, the Revolutionary Guards and the people closely affiliated with the government have really taken over most of the economic assets, most of the corporations. And as a result, you have at the same time an unfair distribution of these resources. And then on top of that, you have the pressure that the entire economy faces when the normal channels of trade are disrupted. And even the money that the Iranian petroleum exports generate cannot be transferred into the country because of the financial sanctions. So I would say root cause is the sanctions that have been going on for 4 decades, but that has contributed to corruption and all kinds of inefficiencies and economic mismanagement as well.
What we've seen in the past and what we seem to be seeing again is the government stopgapping some of these issues by subsidizing various things. To what extent does that help or not help? What should they be doing instead?
Those subsidies are very substantial in the Iranian economy, especially the fuel and electricity and natural gas subsidies. One of the problems is that the government is running very high fiscal deficits, budget deficits, and they have been trying to rationalize those subsidies. For example, turn them into cash payments to the lower class rather than selling the fuel at very low cost. But that has been a major challenge for the government, how to transition that. One of the issues that caused additional anger in the society was that a few weeks ahead of these protests, government tried to raise the fuel prices. It's still heavily subsidized, but for many people that was a shock as well.
Really good to get your perspective. Nader Habibi, Professor in Middle East Economics at Brandeis University.
My pleasure.
And that is our show for this week. Get in touch with us on X. I'm at Nalein Saeed. Do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. Counting the cost at aljazeera.net is our address. And there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That will take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Nalein Saeed from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera coming up next.